Welcome to the channel. Jacob and I are absolutely over the moon, thrilled to be joined by Mr. John Picacio. We've been trying to put this together for a minute. We finally have it. Welcome, my friend.
What's going on, everybody? How's it going, guys?
Whether you know it or not, you are a huge John Picacio fan. He has done art for your favorite franchises. He has done art for your favorite book covers of your favorite books of all time. He has done it all. Let me just prove it to you by taking a quick tour of all the hardware on his mantelpiece, and you're going to get an idea of who we have right here. John Picacio and his work has won 3 Hugo Awards, 9 Chesley Awards, 5 Locust Awards, 2 International Horror Guild Awards, a World Fantasy Award, and an Inkpot Award, all for your art cover work in the world of fantasy and science fiction. I want to go all the way back to the beginning. And look, this is what I find when people go on an artist journey, when they kind of realize this is what they want to do. They want to be a storyteller. They want to be an artist of one kind, of another, whatever medium. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. It's like a calling. Do you remember that moment? Do you remember that moment when you realized I think this is what I have to do. This is what I want to do with my life?
I don't think I remember a time when I wasn't wanting to work either in comics or in genre. I don't remember a time when I didn't want to be that. I can remember lots of times when life and certain individuals wanted me to do other things.
Sure.
But as far as me, I mean, it goes back to, honestly, I can't say what the comic book would be, but it's literally sitting in the front side of a shopping cart at a grocery store called Handy Andy.
Yes.
on Bandera Road, near Woodlawn. And it had to be back in the early 70s, probably, pre-1975. Because I'm sitting in the front of a shopping cart, and I can remember trying to grab onto the spinner rack.
Yes.
And grabbing something off the spinner rack, and I can't remember what it would have been. So, I mean, I don't think I'm a toddler, but I'm, probably bigger than I should have been sitting in front of a shopping cart, I would imagine. But, I do remember grabbing a comic off the spinner rack and my mother saying, "You can only have one." And so, I have all those early memories of looking at comic book spinner racks and picking out Batman, Dead Man. We didn't have a lot of money, so honestly, team books were a big thing for me. Justice League of America, a little bit of Avengers, but I think when I was early on as a kid, I was a DC person for some reason. Those characters seemed to stick for me, but then I did shift over to Marvel and became an omnivore, really. But really, comic books were the gateway drug. But we're talking early. We're talking probably pre-first grade. And so I was copying those kinds of, I was copying from comics from the go.
That young you started.
Yeah. I mean, I'm drawing early and copying early and looking at, this Star Wars hasn't come out at that point. So I'm still watching Star Trek syndicated, episodes on Kins 5 here in San Antonio, and copying things I'm seeing off those episodes too, and copying badly. I'm sure. I'm glad that those drawings don't exist.
But I was going to ask if you've ever gone back to look at them. That would be cool.
There's still drawings exist from not that far back, but from my mother has all that blackmail material. But I mean, the answer to the question is I don't think I've never not wanted to do this stuff, but like a lot of people who are listening to this, and you guys are the same way, I mean, we have these dreams, and it's never a linear path. So like, I have no formal art education per se. I never got to go to school for art. I was discouraged from it, and I had great parents, don't get me wrong, terrific parents, but I mean, I was a kid who was getting some scholarship offers coming out of high school, just for academic scholarship offers, and most people in my family hadn't had that opportunity to go to college, so
sure.
My parents were pretty apprehensive about me saying, I want to go into art school, and I want to draw comics and work in the movies and such. And so they were like, well, you need to get a professional degree. And they were pretty firm about that. And I guess being a kid, I wasn't strong enough to push back at that point. So I went with the one professional career that you can do where you are drawing all day long, theoretically. And you guys can guess what that would be: architecture.
Architecture, yep.
So it wasn't what I most wanted to do. It wasn't like I grew up wanting to be an architect, but I figured, hey, I get to be creative, I get to draw, and it gets them off my back in a way, and it makes them happy. So yeah, I went to UT Austin. I did finish the program, 5-year program, Bachelor of Architecture. But I will give you, you asked the question, and this has been a long answer, so we'll wrap this up.
That's great, man. I love long answers.
Yeah.
When did that happen? Like I told you, it's as early as being a kid grabbing off the spinner rack at the grocery store. But there was a really, I don't know, is the word epiphanal a real word? But there wasn't, I guess what close to be an epiphany for me would have been the 3rd year of architecture school. So this had been about circa 1990.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the opportunity to go to Europe. And this is a kid who, again, we didn't have a lot of money. So I had never been on a plane previous to this. Wow. And so
epiphanal is right. This is huge.
Never been on a plane. And so I got a chance to go to Europe for a semester. And we had to pay for it. It wasn't like it was free, and I had to work during the summer and sell a lot of stuff I wish I had back now to try to afford this trip. But it was through the school. It was through UT. And, some of the kids who could afford it, most of them who could afford it way more than me, took this trip. And I went on it, and we went to London, Paris, Barcelona, Lugano, Switzerland, Vienna, Austria, Rome. But in between those, you're hitting all these other towns and places. So I did go to Venice. I did go to Florence. I did go to Zaragoza. There were other places, but in those 6 towns that I first mentioned, or cities, we did projects. We did architectural projects in each of those cities, and that's how you got your credit for the semester. But where this comes back to our story is in London. Well, really in all the cities, I'd always play hooky. I'd get my work done.
Yeah.
I'd listen to the lectures, but I mapped out for the trip every single film poster shop, every comic book shop in every single one of these places, big or small. Of course, if you're in London and you've never even been overseas, I mean, you're gaga if you're me, who, looking at all these places that you've heard about, these British comic book shops. And so I had them all mapped out before I had even left the States, not knowing whether I'd get to hit them. But once I was there, they weren't going to stop me. I mean, so I would disappear on my own and go hit these places. And there was this one called, I want to say it was Gosh Comics, which I think at the time was across from the British Museum. I think it no longer is there. My God, I went into that place and there was nobody in there. I remember it was close to lunchtime. And I remember there was this rack, like, when you walk into those Spencer's Gifts places or those poster places, and they have those swinging racks, those metal racks where you can kind of swing through the posters. Well, instead of posters, it had original comic book art in these racks. And I had never seen original comic art in my life. At the time, before I'd left for this trip, I was really starting to discover some of the more painterly comic book artists like Dave McKean, Kent Williams, George Pratt, John Muth, those guys. Arkham Asylum had come out by now. Arkham Asylum was out there, the graphic novel. And I think I had picked these things up before I had left. But I remember on that trip, in fact, at this store, I found an edition, one of the first editions of Violent Cases, a first printing of that. And that really struck me. Violent Cases, a graphic novel, the first graphic novel that Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean ever did together. And McKean's illustrations in those things were really game changing, just because it just seemed like the world was his palette. He could use anything to be able to tell a story. It wasn't all just pencils and inks and even just limited to that plus paint. I mean, this guy was using everything: collage, found objects, and of course the Sandman covers would be doing that as well, which would have been coming out around that time, but I hadn't discovered those yet, and it was still early for that. But in these racks, there was original art. And in fact, some of it was the original art from Arkham Asylum and from Signal to Noise and some of this other stuff that had already come out that I was not aware of. And so the guy saw me looking at these things, and he said, "Hey, would you like to get a closer look at those?" And I couldn't imagine what a closer look would be when they're in this rack, and I got my face in these things. And so he gently took them out of these racks and put them on the floor, just so I could get on my hands and knees and just literally stick my nose like that far from these things. And I wish I would have. I can still see his face, but I wish I would have gotten a name from him, because he really did, in a sense, change my life. Because I was able to literally, I didn't want to touch these things, but I was able to just get my face right up against them. And I still remember me knowing at that point the clock was ticking on architecture. There was no way I was going to be a full-time architect. I knew I had to fulfill the program. I knew I was probably going to have to go into the professional ranks in architecture, but there was no way this was going to be the rest of my life. It was going to at least have to share time with genre, and at that point, comics. But that was a big one for me.
Man, that's huge. What a story. So, we met you coming into my comic shop. I'm a comic guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
I love that so much. But you've gone on to do some of my favorite covers of some of my favorite books all time. Was there a moment when you started like realizing cover artists, other than just like the amazing artists you mentioned, Dave McKean and John Muth, and I still remember my copies of Moonshadow. When you mentioned John Muth, man, it takes me back, brother. Yeah. But was there ever like some other influences on like Frazetta covers or Wayland covers? I mean, do you remember starting to look at kind of covers and getting influences like that as your journey went on?
I did, but it was later, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that first answer was so long. I'm going to try to shorten these a little bit. I mean, I get out of architecture school, and I start working as an intern architect for a few different firms, but most of them were residential, usually for clients who had way more money than they deserved, building houses that were way bigger than they should have. But it was a job, and I was lucky to have some decent bosses. The last one I had, I think he understood that I was in a different place. At that point, I was already really starting to live, eat, and breathe illustration. Every second, I wasn't having to draw something for the firm. And I think he recognized that, so he kind of let me have a long leash, so to speak, to explore that stuff in my off hours there in the office. But the thing I want to impart is that when I got out of architecture school, I started making these self-published comics. They were called Words and Pictures. I did it with a friend of mine. He got half the book and I got half the book, and we each were writing and drawing our own stories. And that was what I did straight out of architecture school. And those comics I did, even though there was only a couple of issues of them, caught the attention of book publishers, science fiction book publishers, small press, but still. And so one of them approached me, said, "Hey, would you like to do the cover of this Michael Moorcock book? It's a 30th anniversary edition of a novella called Behold the Man. We'd like to see if you'd like to do the cover for this." And I had never thought of doing something like this. And my first answer was no. And they said, why wouldn't you want to do this? And I said, well, I really want to do comics. I want to do my comics. And this isn't really something I would really want to do. I think I want to keep doing comics. And they said, well, it's a Michael Moorcock book, though. I mean, come on. I knew who Moorcock was. I knew he was a big deal. I had never read any of his stuff at that point, but I did know enough to know he was a big deal. Plus, I think part of why I knew it is because there were so many comics adaptations of his work. So I knew that name. But I just wasn't feeling it for whatever reason. And the conversation went back and forth. And the guy's name was Rick Claw. He was the editor on this project. Still a friend. And he was persistent. And he said, what would it take? And they had already offered me a decent amount of money for that cover. And I wasn't trying to negotiate. I just wasn't that interested. And at least not in just doing the cover. And I said, well, who's doing the interior illustrations, and who's doing the headers, and who's doing the jacket design, and who's doing the typesetting, and who's designing, how do the inflaps get designed, and who designs that? And he says, why do you want to know? I was like, well, if I could do the cover art, couldn't I do all that stuff too? He says, yeah, but you've never done any of that stuff. I was like, I've never done a book cover for a science fiction book either. And you want me to do that. So why can't I do all of it? And he says, oh, well, let's think about it. And I said, look, if I could build a house, why can't I build a book? And it's a really arrogant thing to say, but that is what I said at that time. I was still in my early to mid 20s. Really arrogant looking back, but I think that's what sealed it for Rick probably. And so they came back with a bigger pile of money, and it wasn't the money. I think it was the idea of just getting to control the whole object
Yes.
and learn the whole object. Like
Yes.
that's really what tipped me over. I think I felt some sense that, well, I could do a cover for this, but what's the purpose of this?
What do I take from that? Yeah. What do I take from that
and I think
experience?
that's what did it. It was like when Rick said that I could design the whole book. I fell in love. I mean, I truly did. And I've told Rick this over and over that, that changed everything for me, because it wasn't just me doing the cover part. It was me understanding the whole book as a machine. And,
Yes.
And then of course it was the whole thing of that alpha thing, that thing of having the responsibility of putting this story out in front of people with your image, and that image is what's going to help it connect with an audience. And that sort of responsibility really hit that kind of alpha button in me
For
that
sure.
still continues to this day, that whole responsibility of being able to put a story out there in front of people, and that your image is going to be so important to connecting it with an audience. And that was where that love affair began, and that feeling of wanting to always do right by these stories. And then having relationships with the authors too from time to time. And that did happen with Moorcock. And that was a large part of also sort of falling in love with the business and falling in love with the process, is I got to meet Mike early on. And it was a really important lesson there too. It was I remember going to his house. He had several houses at that point. One of them was up in central Texas, outside of Austin. And I had some sketches for the interior illustrations for Behold the Man. And I showed them to Mike, and I said, hey, look, these are the ideas I have, but I'd really like to get your thoughts. Like, what would you like me to draw? And he says, you're the artist, you figure it out. And he was really not saying it in an ugly way, but I look back on it, and it was when I was riding in the car back home with Ben Ostrander, the publisher, driving, and Rick was in the passenger seat, and I was in the back seat by myself, and thinking about that line that he said. It was like the greatest gift, because, I'm the greenest rookie ever. And he could have said, yeah, son, here, let me tell you how this works. And let me tell you what I think would be best. But he did the coolest thing ever by just saying, and essentially he was saying, you need to take us somewhere where we couldn't go without you. Otherwise, why should you be here? And he didn't say it that way, but that is what those words essentially were imparting to me. It's like, look, you got the football, don't fumble it back to us and hand it back, like take it and run with it. I mean, that is the job of being an artist, is take us somewhere where we couldn't go by ourselves. And so that's carried me through my whole career. That whole attitude of, you're the artist, you figure it out. Well, it's my job to figure this stuff out. It's my job to lead the team toward a solution that helps us to connect this story with people that otherwise it wouldn't. So yeah, that was an important one.
Wow. What a grand gift from one artist to another. There's like, I'm not going to get between you and what you're creating. I mean, that's just, for someone at that stature, at that point, that's pretty special, man.
But that's Mike too. I mean, if you think about Mike, I mean, he's still going, he's still writing. I mean, what is he? He's 1 year younger than my father. So he's born in 1939. I mean, you can do the math. I mean, he's way up there, right? He's old, but he's still going. And you think of all the careers that he started from even back in the 60s when he was doing New Worlds magazine. I mean, not just writers, but artists, musicians. It's not just that he collaborates with people. He literally helped so many people start their careers. It's like one of those things. It's like, when he does pass, which I hope is still many years down the road,
absolutely,
I think people will look back and appreciate him in ways that they don't appreciate him now. Not only his literary legacy, both in genre and in general fiction, but the legacy that he has as far as being one of those people that didn't just influence the way the genre is shaped, but literally just like, if you took away the personalities that he brought into the field, we would just be not nearly the field we are. I mean, he literally changed the whole game. And I don't think people will appreciate that till after he's gone, unfortunately, because I think that's the way it is with these things. But yeah, I'm one of them. Without him, I don't think I'd be here.
Oh, that's amazing. One quick question, then I'm going to turn it over to Jakob for a chunk.
Sure.
I'm blown away that, and I probably shouldn't be, because so many artists I completely admire and respect are of this cut from the same cloth. When you say you didn't go to conservatory, you didn't go to an art school, you were self-taught. Can you give me a little bit of a glimpse into what that journey was like? Like, it just like that just stuns me when I look at your work, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's always drawing things just because I want to, right? I mean, and I'm still that way, you know. I mean, it's not even like I'm a guy who's like laboring over it day after day, but I'm constantly looking at stuff. I'm constantly listening and taking things in. I'm constantly, you know, it's like a faucet that doesn't turn off. I mean, ask my wife. That's hard to live with, or hard for other people, I would imagine, to live with, because it's not like I'm constantly talking about it. I know I'm not constantly talking about it, but it's constantly running up there.
Yeah.
I'm constantly taking in, I'm constantly processing, I'm constantly, for lack of a better word, creating. You know, I'm thinking about what the next thing is I'm going to do constantly. And there's not many experiences in life that stop that faucet. There are very few. And I've never really talked with a lot of creatives about this, but I can tell that there's some that I know that I think they are like that, and I think it can lead to some dysfunction in life. Unfortunately, I think I'm lucky to have certain people in my life that, you know, understand that that's just kind of the way I am. And I think on the outside, I think I probably appear fairly normal, I would hope. But that faucet runs constantly. And it's not like I'm constantly scribbling and drawing, but I am constantly thinking. Like even right now, there's stuff playing in the back here that's thinking about this book that's trying to come out. So it's always processing. And yeah, it's like living in the toy store though. That's the thing to say. That's the thing that I think I want people to know, is that, you know, I feel lucky. I don't feel like this is any sort of curse or a bad thing. And, you know, I tell my kid, even, who I think also has some pretty strong creative abilities, and she's trying to sort through how to process all this stuff. And I say, you know, it can lead to some really dark, I don't know, it can lead to some darkness, I think, to have all this stuff constantly running. And I think it's how you channel it and how you let it out, and how you, I wouldn't say the words express yourself. I mean, I think, that's important for a lot of people to feel like they can express themselves, but I kind of got over that pretty early. I think doing those comics really kind of got that out of me, as far as I'm not really interested in just expressing myself. I did do some of that in those early comics where I was just trying to express something, and that wasn't enough. I wanted to be able to connect with people. I wanted to be able to take my eyeballs out and hand them to people and let them see the world through my eyeballs. And if I wasn't doing that, and I didn't feel like I was really doing what I want to be doing, it wasn't good enough just to, well, I just want to express myself. That wasn't going to cut it. Not saying that that's not good for other folk. It just wasn't where I wanted to live. So yeah, story is important. I'm on Talking Story, for God's sake. And I think we all kind of think like this. So it's probably why we're kinfolk.
Yeah, man, that's why we're people. All right.
Yeah.
You're up, Jakob.
I was about to say, I'm really glad that you mentioned, you know, like showing other people your vision and everything, because that makes my job to segue really easy. You've worked a lot in this medium and collaboration, obviously, and you were talking about the joy that comes with building the book as a product that you want your hands all over it. You want to learn everything that goes into the dust jacket and the end papers and everything like that. And that end product is involved with a whole system of people that put their vision all over it. And I've heard, I come from film, obviously, and I've heard many people within the system of film talk about, in that collaboration, you can come at it with the perspective of, I'm here to enact my vision the best that I possibly can. And I'm going to be within this collaborative effort, but I'm going to take what's in my head and just be the best artist that I can. And that's going to come and make a better product. Or you can come at it from the perspective of, hey, there's a lot of people here, either above or around me, that have a vision of what this final product is going to be. My job is to make sure that that vision comes to life. How do you approach your collaborations? Do you have a specific one or the other, or is it something different?
It's definitely more the first one than the second one, as far as those two scenarios you threw out. I can tell you that right now. I mean, you know, again, it's recognizing that you have been brought into a project for certain reasons, and they're not going to necessarily tell you what those reasons are. And a lot of times, especially these days, you'll come into projects and they'll say, this is what we're trying to do, and we have some ideas about what we want. And I'm always going to listen to that stuff. I'm never going to dismiss it. I'm always going to pay attention to what everybody within the process chain that I'm exposed to have to say. I'm going to pay attention to it. Sales, marketing, editor, all of it. Art director, obviously. But in the end, it is about trying to bring something to the project that wouldn't have been there if I wouldn't have been on the team. And whether the other people know that or not, that is why I'm there. That's why they brought me in. And I think a lot of people do these days think that the best thing you can do is bring somebody in to just do what you want. Unfortunately, though, I think that leads to some really bad results because you can think you know what you want, but I mean, I know the best art directors, the great ones, really do realize that you're bringing in people to bring something special to the project. And so I've been lucky to work with a lot of those great art directors who, it's not even like they give you a long leash. It's just that they say, all right, you've shown us with these other projects what you can do. We want you to bring some of that specialness of you to this particular book. So, yeah, I look at it as I'm there to bring something of not so much just of myself, but I'll tell you kind of how I look at a cover. I look at a story not so much about whether I like it or not. I look at it as a person. Again, I'm talking about the story, not the author. So I look at it as I'm going to read this story, which again, that might set me apart from some artists too, because a lot of them maybe don't even care to read the thing. But I'm going to read that story. I'm going to take it into me, and I'm going to think of it as a person. So if I were to introduce either one of you guys at a party, I'm not going to introduce you with a couple of things that annoy me about you. I'm going to introduce you with a couple of things that I think are super cool about you. That'll make the people at the party say, oh, I want to get to know this guy. That are going to connect you with those people. That's the way you introduce somebody if you're cool, if you care about them, And so, it doesn't matter whether I like or don't like this story. It's a matter of what are the 2 or 3 things that I think are really strong about this story on its own terms, and that I think will connect it, that I think the world would engage with. And how do I create a visual image that takes those 2 or 3 things and brings them into a single image that can brand that story such that it'll connect with an audience? So when I do a piece of cover art, essentially it's like taking a friend to a party, and the world is the party, and that friend is the story. And I'm trying to create a story, a piece of cover art that'll make people want to befriend this story. And that's really what it is. What image can I do that will make them want to take home this person, this story? And I don't think I always consciously thought like that when I was working through the first maybe 1.5 to 2 decades of my career, but that was what I was doing all along. And then I became conscious that this is what I'm doing. Because I don't necessarily love every single book that I've ever done a piece of cover art for, but it never mattered because I was always finding those 2 or 3 things that I thought were personally cool about this thing. And that's the difference, guys. I mean, and I say that to everybody out there is this, it wasn't like I looked at a brief or looked at somebody else's, notes or an email and said, well, this is what we think you need to put on the cover. They're always going to say that. And I think a lot of times what I want to do ends up overlapping with those things also. I'm always going to engage that stuff anyway, but it's really what turns me on. And so yeah. I think it's that personal connection, and people pick up on that. I've had so many people come to me over the years saying, your covers always feel like I can trust your covers. I can trust your cover to tell me whether I'm going to like something. And I've heard so many people say that, and I take that as a great honor. But I understand now why that is. It's because I was always being honest and personal about the image that I was putting on the front of that cover. It wasn't a piece of, marketing for the sake of just trying to snow people into like, come on, like this book. It was because this is what I thought was cool about this book. And it was something that was honest, I hope. Well, I mean, it was honest, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to then connect the book with everyone. And I think that's also something that's key to remember. I think publishers, especially in the sales and marketing side, they want visual solutions that will connect with everybody if possible. And I don't think that's necessarily the best thing for most books, because most books aren't really meant to connect with everybody. That is how you get really boring, horrible cover art and design, is because you're trying to please everybody. And I don't think the things that I do are ever meant to do that, because I don't think the books are meant to do that. These books are usually weird, and they're wonderfully weird. And I'm
Beautifully so,
always
yeah.
interested in that aspect just by default. But like I say, these are people, these stories. And I think you always have to find what's the cool thing about this particular thing, and try to evoke that in an image. That's what I do.
So you mentioned that you weren't necessarily aware that that was part of your process when you were working in the earlier days. Is that something that, I mean, you've been working for quite a while now.
Almost 3 decades. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I were, say, to come to you and say, I have a job for you, John, here's the book, do your process and read it. What does that process look like? Has it gotten to the point where you've just got an equation? This is how I work and this is how I reach that final product.
I wouldn't say an equation, but I would say, yeah, everybody has a process. So mine is read the book. I'm always taking notes on it, like kind of either writing in the margins or scribbling something in my sketchbook, making lists, of things that kind of hit me, page beats, whatever. And I'll kind of take those notes and summarize that, kind of put them into a document that I'll just kind of stare at, usually for a couple days, and just start scribbling little sketches off of, little thumbnails. I'm not really thumbnailing when I'm reading, because I'm trying to absorb the person, absorb the story, and
Right.
take it into me, right? So I know a lot of artists are already starting to draw even when they're reading a manuscript the first time, and God love them for it. It's great, but that's not really me getting to know this story. So I'm getting to know the story first. I take my notes, do my brief, so to speak, and then I'm kind of sketching based off of that. And again, taking in the emails from the other parts of the team too. But it's really about those notes that I'm taking down, and then those thumbnails, and then coming up with a few comp sketches that I'll then show to the team and my art director, and then it goes from there. That's where well, we like this, and we like this part of this, or just we like this one particular sketch. And I also find over the years that I got better and better at sort of helping the team to decide which one what I thought was the best one. I mean, it's always about the art director, and it's always about working with the team. But, I mean, look, not to tell tales, but publishing's tough. And being in those offices and those corporations, there's people who are very overworked, and they're doing fantastic work, but they're so stretched thin. So there's times when, I'm working with an art director who's never read this book. I mean, and they're just more of a traffic manager trying to, keep everything straight. So, in a way, I'm teaching the art director as I'm providing these notes and saying, I think this is the better idea, how they can present this thing to the rest of the company. That happens more often than you might think, and that doesn't mean it's a bad art director. I mean, in fact, some of the best art directors haven't read the material. And, I've never met editors that haven't read the material, but look, I'll tell you another tale. I have done covers, and I won't say which ones, but I have done covers for books that haven't even been written yet. And I mean that.
Whoa.
Like, I've literally done books covers for books that were still in outline form, if that. And I had to come up with an image that was definitive, iconic, and was going to sell this thing for the rest of its first printed life, and really it's because the demands for solicitation have become so, like sometimes you have to solicit these things a year in advance, or more, especially if it's a high profile book. And so they need an image, and sometimes the writer's still working on it. In fact, a lot of times the writers are still working on these books. But I have done some where it's so early in the process that, yeah, I barely had anything. There have been a couple, and I will say some of these two that I'm thinking of were a couple of my more notable covers in the last 10 years, where I literally had to call the author and say, tell me the story as you're hearing it in your head right now, because there really wasn't much words on paper yet.
Wow.
And those covers were very successful, really just because I just really took in the lullaby of hearing this author talk through the story. And I think they were kind of discovering some stuff in the story as they were talking to me. So I think it kind of helped them. But yeah, you don't always get access to the author either. I think a lot of times publishers want to keep the artist and the author separated. And I think it's more because sometimes authors have too strong of an idea of what they want on the cover, and That's not necessarily always the best idea for the sake of the cover, and for its marketability. And so publishers are aware of that. But I always find that I've had great relationships with authors and writers because, one, I love them and respect them as fellow creators. But I also understand that I'm kind of what's the word? I know how to gatekeep their bad thoughts from getting too involved in the cover too deep. Like, but getting to hear the sort of their intentions and their heart and their soul come out when they're telling me these things is always good for me. And I think it's always good for the book, but I can understand why the publisher would be scared for us to be connecting. So I will say that a lot of times I have gone through the back door and talked to authors even when I wasn't supposed to, just because it did help me to kind of tune in a little bit better and just come up with the best image possible that would have the most integrity with the story. So it's always about that.
I mean, that's a kind of collaboration that's really special. And collaboration can be really tricky for the exact things that you brought up. As like some people have a really strong idea that may not be the best idea, and you kind of have to talk
Right.
them out of it.
Exactly.
But
Yep.
I mean, you've now worked with countless publishers, and you've worked with authors like Rebecca Roanhorse, Michael Moorcock, Harlan Ellison, and even franchises like Song of Ice and Fire and Star Trek and X-Men. And now you've co-written and also illustrated this lovely book, The Invisible Parade, with Lee Bardugo.
Yep.
And I mean, that kind of experience of collaborating with another person and trying to get that person out of the story, like you were talking about, is that part of the process that you love? Or is there potentially some future point where there will be a book that is written and illustrated by John Picacio, and you've developed that person yourself, that you're telling us the three things what to love about them?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a sense that just happened with that thing that you just held up. I mean, so that's The Invisible Parade was, it's almost 10 years ago now, where I'm in studio and like, look, both of you guys, I know you've already written a book. You've got more books in your head. I have no doubt. A lot of people listening to this right now, you all have these different containers of story that live in your head, and maybe some of them will even get done someday, and maybe there's some that you're working on right now, and there's going to be plenty that never see the light of day, but they all have different shapes, these different containers of story. And it's just one day this girl walks through and she's hurting, and she's walking through this graveyard, and she meets the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I just started to see the beats and the melody for this little story. And I just started scribbling on these little Post-it notes like a crazy man, just started writing down these beats as fast as I could. And I knew when I was done writing these beats down that I had something that was the shape of a picture book. I'd never done a picture book. I have some picture books in my collection. I have a lot more of them now. But there were certain picture book artists that I really have always admired, like Sean Tan would be one of them. Fantastic picture book artist and illustrator. And there's a few others, but yeah, I never thought about, hey, I want to be a picture book creator or picture book author. But I knew this story was good. I knew it was cool. I knew it was unusual. I knew it was something that already had a piece of my soul in it. And I knew it was something I wanted to see to the light of day. At the time, and this is kind of skipping over a couple beats, but I'll just throw it in there. I was making these things called Loteria Cards. So just for people who don't speak Spanish, Loteria, Spanish word for lottery. So Loteria is like Mexican bingo, but I was taking these little Mexican bingo icons and redoing them in my own weirdo way into these sort of larger format, almost like tarot cards, where I was redoing the illustrations, but doing them my way, in a way that looked completely unlike the regular Mexican bingo icons that all of us as Mexican Americans grew up with. But I was already doing those things and realizing that those things were becoming a story. And I knew at that point, those things were going to become a book at some point. So I was already working on this bizarre mosaic illustrated story that was based off these cards that I was making. And that was a really lonely road. And now here comes this girl in a graveyard, meeting the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is a whole different other story. And I don't think I wanted to work on two stories all by myself. I thought one lonely road I can handle. Two lonely roads right now when I've never written anything. I think I need a friend, and I need someone I love. I need someone I can laugh with. I need someone who I enjoy. I need someone who I trust. And that's a short list. And so I called up my friend Lee Bardugo, whom I had met at a George R. Martin party, which was at a Worldcon, and it was in 2011. She walked up to me at this party, and she did not have a book out yet. This is the woman who created a book called Shadow and Bone, created the Ninth House, created a book called The Familiar, the Shadow and Bone, the Grishaverse became this hit show on Netflix that was beautiful, beautiful show that ran for 2 seasons before Netflix screwed up and canceled it, like so many great shows have been canceled on Netflix. And that show was beautiful, and it was a wonderful 2 seasons. But Shadow and Bone did not exist at that point in a published form. She was bringing me comps of the covers to this party. We had never met before. And she walked up to me and said, I know who you are. You're John Picacio. May I show you these pictures of this cover for a book of mine? And I recall actually seeing an advanced reader copy of this thing. That's what I recall. She seems to remember it differently. But I just remember being impressed with what she was showing me. I was impressed with how she behaved and how she was so cool and thoughtful and like a shark, really, also. She was very driven. So, I mean, it was a party. There's a lot of alcohol. My friends are around. And I guess I got so interested in listening to her and talking about this stuff, they just drifted away. And we ended up just hanging out the rest of the night. And I just remember her being very ferociously passionate about what she was doing. And we just clicked. There's just certain people you just click with. And so we hung out some more during that convention. But then over the next several years, whenever we would intersect on the road, we would always make time for each other. And I will say, a lot of your listeners and viewers are going to know, I mean, this woman's a mega star. I mean, when she came out with Shadow and Bone, that thing took off. It's not like she had a slow run up the ladder. She rocketed fast. So it was always her making time for me, really, than the other way around. But it wasn't like I was ever like hunting her down. We just always kind of looked out for each other. And so when I came up with this idea for the Invisible Parade, I went to her and said, look, I want to do this with you. I would like to tell you these beats. And if you're interested, I'd like to do this story with you. I didn't want just her words. I wanted her heart in it. I wanted her to bring how she wanted to tell this story and bring elements of herself. And that is exactly what happened. I mean, she apparently had this desire to tell a story about how people process grief and how her grandfather was such an important force in her life, an important force in her becoming an author. And she had a need to tell a story that somewhat intersected with the story that I wanted to tell. I'm the Mexican American in the collaboration, right? And this is a story about, as I said, a girl in a graveyard who meets the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse on the night of Dia de Muertos, and that beat I hadn't said before. So it's a very Dia de Muertos story, or Dia de los Muertos for some of you all out there. Day of the Dead. It's a very Day of the Dead story. It is about the Day of the Dead. But when I was doing the story in my head, it was very much a story about overcoming the fear of death, which is a universal thing, not just a kid's thing. It's a universal thing. And when Lee got a hold of it, she's not the Mexican American in the collaboration. It shifted to becoming a story about how Mexicans or how certain people process grief. And I'm going to tell you that's a far more Mexican thing, to go from overcoming the fear of death to talking about how how my culture or certain cultures process grief.
Sure.
So it became more Mexican in a way when she pivoted it like that, which I think is important to say, because a lot of people might give that credit to me, but that was her. And that's the thing about this collaboration, is like, I did bring this story to her, but in the end, there's things that people are going to see in the book and say, oh, that seems like such a Bardugo thing. And it's like, no, that was actually Picasso. And there's going to be things where people are going to say, oh, that's such a great John Picasso beat right there. And it's like, no, that was actually Lee Bardugo. So it wasn't like she was drawing. I drew the whole thing. It wasn't like I wrote it all by myself. No, Lee, those words are, I consider, quintessentially Lee Bardugo words. But if we were going to talk about this in comic book language, it would be like we co-plotted the thing together. I created the plot, the basic initial plot, but once she got a hold of it, it became both of us. It's just quintessentially both of us intertwined to where you can almost not distinguish where one starts and the other ends. But yeah, I consider it a total team effort between us. It wasn't the usual collaboration of writer's going to do this and artist and illustrator's going to do this. I had my hands in it much more deeply, but I think Lee influenced those pictures far more than anybody has ever influenced any pictures that I've ever done. They really are both of us.
Just a quick break in the action to thank all of our correspondents, directors, and producers on Patreon. These people keep the lights on. They make decisions for us because we don't know what we're doing. We're not great at making the decisions around here. The decisions all the way from what I'm going to read next, what the book club of the month Patreon pick is going to be, but all the way up to video ideas and what we're going to do here on the channel coming up for you. If you're interested or you want to find out how you can be a part of this, right down there in the description box, click the Patreon link. It's got all the answers for you. And once again, thank you to all of these fine people that are helping us build the channel, our correspondents, directors, and producers. I got to talk about some of the iconic stuff that you've done, John. And the first question I have is when someone comes to you and they want you to do something like Jacob talked about, like the franchises, the iconic classic covers and things like that. I'm going to run down a couple of them and just see, like, get your thoughts on working on them. But my first question is, like, when someone comes, does that bring a little bit extra weight to it? Does that bring a little bit extra, oh man, I better hit this one out of the park? I mean, what's that like when someone brings you like a Star Trek or an Elric or the Song of Ice and Fire project? Like what kind of pressure does that bring with it, if it does any extra pressure?
I love pressure. I mean, that's that's the thing, is I get off on that. I mean, remember I told you that whole thing about that alpha thing of like, that's when I knew I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. That from that first cover, the idea of like, I am responsible for this image being able to connect this thing with this audience. And so that was on a small press book that was like, what, 3,000 copies. And I just really liked the weight of that responsibility. It felt very comfortable for me. It felt like something that I wanted a lot more of. So yeah, I mean, as the years go along and, I keep getting these bigger and bigger jobs, and occasionally something like Star Trek walks through the door. Yeah. I mean, don't think I'm like, there's never a moment of like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. It's a thing of, I find that it's a thing of like, the pressure is if you want to call it that, is a good thing for me. It's not it never is like a thing of me feeling scared about being a part of a continuum like that. Like I want to be in those continuums. I feel like that's important to me. I want to be part of those legacies. And there's certain ones that I don't care about, but there's the ones that I do care about and that do come to me. Yeah, I jump all over it. But I will say this too. I think you can be too eager. I think you can be too much trying to be a fan and too much trying to not just do the job. And just like with anything, you kind of have to slow yourself down. And how do you do that? So one of my tricks for doing that is I'll go back and look at everything I can about the history, the visual history of that particular franchise. So whether it be Song of Ice and Fire or Star Trek or X-Men, or you name it, I'll always take a couple of days, literally at least a couple of days, where I'll go back and just immerse myself in the visual history. And you learn things and you teach yourself things and you learn about artists maybe that you really didn't pay as much attention to before. And a lot of times back in the day, I would create these little sort of montages of all these various artists, and I would kind of keep them in a folder or even pin them up on the wall and just kind of keep that stuff in front of me for a little bit and then just take it all down. And that's the important bit too. So having all that stuff kind of processed through you allows you to think about what's been done so that you can then put it aside and say, where has this not been before and where can I take it that it hasn't gone before, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of trying to slow the process down and slowly, how do you say, not slow the process down, slow your emotional baggage, or try to get rid of the emotional baggage where you're letting it become too heavy. And but you want to embrace that continuum and embrace that sort of weight of responsibility. But I think you gotta look at all that stuff and then just put it away.
Yeah.
But the thing you're trying to get out of it is, okay, I've seen all the stuff that's been done before. Now where can I take it?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the way I approach those things. So like, I walked into your comic book store. I don't know what year that was.
Oh,
And I don't know whether you knew it or or whether I told you, because I don't think I was telling too many people at that point about that Song of Ice and Fire calendar. But I remember you had been reading the books. I think you were a big fan of them, as I recall.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember I was looking for reference models, because I use a lot of times reference models for to get started on a project. And I'm never trying to draw people just the way they are in real life. I'm just using them as an armature so that I can kind of figure out how I want to depict this character, because it's how I see him in my head. And I'm just trying to get it down onto the board. And I was doing that with Song of Ice and Fire. I knew there was going to be these different characters I was going to have to depict. Many of them who hadn't really been depicted in a really iconic form before me. This is pre Game of Thrones for sure. And I think I do remember saying, "Hey, you got a picture of your kid by chance? Like, what does your kid look like?" I remember you pulling a picture out of your wallet and you showed me Jakob, and I was like, bring him in on Saturday or something like that. I remember seeing him and just thinking, okay, wait a minute, that kid might work,
Yeah.
And I think we brought him in, and I think, as I recall, I think we sized him up, took some dimensions off of him. And then I remember going home for the next few days and trying to build a piece of some sort of semblance of costume shapes that we put on him. And then he came in the next weekend, I believe, and we parked him on a gaming table, as I recall.
Yep.
And he still had bedhead. And it was early on a Saturday. And I had these sketches and I showed them to him, and man, he just struck the pose. And I was just like, that's it right there. I mean, you nailed it, man. I remember that feeling when I first saw you do that gesture, the way I had drawn it. And I was like, it was just get the light right. We don't need everything to be perfect. I mean, my reference shoots are always like guerrilla shoots. They're never like, I'm just going to copy this photo. They're always just really rough. But I just remember that was really important. Gosh, I don't know. I went off on a tangent there. But
no, that's awesome.
That means so much to me to hear that you actually enjoyed it. Because when I was a kid, 20 minutes feels like.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember bits of it. Yeah, 20 minutes feels like 3 days. So to me, it felt like, oh man, it's been so long. I'm not giving him what he wants. So I'm glad that.
No, they were fantastic.
Like the rest for me.
That's how Jakob became Bran.
Yeah.
Well, he was, and he is, and who's the guy that plays him in Game of Thrones? What's the kid's name? Isaac.
I
want to say. We can put it up later. Yeah. But terrific actor, terrific guy. So we fast forward to, what is it, 2017 now? Calendar's been out there for many years. It was number one on Amazon back when it came out. It was a big phenomenon. Game of Thrones was obviously massive. I think we were entering. Game of Thrones was entering its 8th and final season at that point. I'm at Alamo City Comic-Con here in San Antonio. And Isaac, the guy who played Bran, was one of the guests at the show.
Oh, really?
And he came up to my table and he said, "You're the man that changed my life." And I said, "I think I know what this story is, but why don't you go and tell me your version of it?" And he said, when he was 7, he was standing in this casting line in this big field with all these other lines of actors lined up in front of all these trailers. And he was lined up in front of he was in line in front of a trailer himself, holding his mom's hand. Called her his mom, of course, because he's British. And he says, "I'm holding my mom's hand and I'm sweating and I'm nervous because it's one of my first roles that I've ever auditioned for. And I see as I get closer, I can see around the people, because I can't see over them. I can see around them that there's all these pictures on the side of all these trailers. And I'm trying to see what the pictures are that are on my trailer. And I know I'm auditioning for this role in this fantasy show. And I kind of understand this character, but as I get closer, some of the pictures are small and some of them are big. And I get within several people of the trailer and I squeezed my mom's hand. I looked up at her and I said, "Mom, it's me. Look at that picture. It's me. That's my face right there." And he said, "When I saw my face up on that trailer, I saw your art and I knew that this was my role because that was me. And they couldn't get anybody like that because I already had that face." And he had convinced himself that was his face. And he said it chilled him out. It got him comfortable. And obviously he got the role, so he said that seeing my art made him feel like this was supposed to be his. So it's funny, man. It kind of started off with you, Jakob, that I channeled what I thought that character should look like, and you helped me to channel that. And that ended up influencing that guy getting that role and basically becoming TV history. So There you
That's
go.
That's
crazy.
amazing. Isaac
That's-
Hempstead Wright is his name.
There it is, and but
Yeah.
it started with you, boy.
I
That is
started with
crazy.
you.
Yeah. I'm just going to throw some out here, John. You tell me what it was like to do it. We'll throw some amazing art on the screen while we do this.
Sure.
I was like you, man. I ran home after school every day to catch Kin's TV5 Star Trek. Like, what was a couple quick lines of what it was like to get to do that?
Incredible. I mean, like the coolest thing about that, I mean, just in a nutshell, is I didn't know that the actors were going to have to sign off on their likenesses. So, I mean, DeForest Kelley was dead, so his estate had to sign off and say, yeah, we like the way you drew DeForest Kelley, just to let the viewers know. Maybe we'll pop this up on the screen. When I was asked to do this 40th anniversary set of books for Star Trek, it was a trilogy, and he said, we want you to do 3 covers. And I looked at what they were doing, and I kind of had started to read the books, and I said, I'm going to give you 1 picture. And they said, yeah, but you need to give us 3 covers. And I said, I'm going to give you 1 picture. They said, yeah, but we need 3 covers. And I said, yeah, you're going to get 1 picture, but you're going to chop it into 3 parts, and that's going to give you 3 covers. And when the fans buy all 3 covers, they can put them together to make this 1 picture. It wasn't like I came up with this out of nowhere. Other series had done this before, but for whatever reason, this particular team acted like I had just created pizza, so this thing sold so many books. I mean, it was really, apparently it sold a lot, because I kept getting Star Trek jobs after this, and they always wanted me to do one of those 1 picture makes 3 cover gimmicks.
There's no other way to do Kirk, Spock, and McCoy except 1 image, right?
Yeah.
Like, has to be.
Yeah. So I did that 1 composition that was basically kind of these iconic headshots of them, with the Enterprise kind of rotating around them, with some kind of textural background stuff that kind of evoked the 60s syndicated show. But I did it kind of all in my style, very personal, because Star Trek was very personal to me, even more so. And so the actors had to sign off. So DeForest Kelley's estate said, yeah, looks great. But Leonard Nimoy, that was the one, because that Spock was my dude when I was a kid. And he just said, I remember the email came back, and it just said, absolutely perfect. Love it. Leonard. And I wish they had given me a copy of this. I mean, because he had even kind of taken a picture of a little note or something and sent it to him, so, or maybe it was a fax or something, but it had his signature on it. And they just kind of sent me a little, what do you call it? A JPEG of it. And I wish I had kept that, even just that JPEG. But I remember reading that and just getting the goosebumps and the hair the fur standing up on the arm, because like there was my guy, and he loved my take on him, and that just meant everything. And then Shatner came in, and he was the only one that's made a little revision comment. He was very sweet and very kind, but he said, "Can he take a little bit off the chin?" And he wasn't kidding. So I had used reference shots from 3rd season. And I guess at that point, he wasn't such a hungry actor. So when
he had had a few meals.
When I had looked at, so when I looked at reference shots of 1st season where he's, a little bit leaner, a little bit hungrier, I kind of used those to guide me to kind of take some of that chin off. And then he was like, yeah, you got it. That's it. So his vision of Kirk is 1st season,
season
James
1.
T. Kirk.
Yeah.
Not third season.
That's hilarious.
But that was my favorite part of that. Yeah.
Let me hit you with another one and see what you think about. We already talked about the amazing Michael Moorcock. How about when Elric of Melniboné came your way? What was that like?
Well, I mean, I had worked with Mike already on a few covers for, like, I guess the first decade of my career. So it was right around that 10 or 11 year mark where Random House came to me and said, we're going to do 6 different omnibus editions, collecting all of Mike's Elric stories to that point, and we'd like you to do the cover for the first one. And that was a big deal to me, because I knew Elric was, I don't know if Mike considers that his signature character, but a lot of people consider that his signature character. I mean, and getting to kind of do my take on it. So when you were asking earlier about, how much Frazetta or Whalen or some of these other, legendary illustrators have been an influence on me, they weren't coming into my career. I mean, I was aware of Frazetta for sure, and I was tangentially aware of Michael and his work, but I really didn't really get touched by their work until I had to contend with it, in a sense.
Sure.
And so when you're doing Elric, you're having to contend with all these guys, because all these guys have done their take. I don't think Frazetta ever did an Elric take per se, but but there's so many illustrators that have, and it's literally the history of fantasy art when you're looking at all these different takes on Elric, and Michael Whalen's is certainly amongst the most preeminent and still most popular. But you're looking at Brom, you're looking at Jack Gaughan, you're looking at Rodney Matthews, you're looking at, the list goes on, Philip Druyet, Mobius. So you've got to look at all these artists. And like I told you before, and I told the audience, when I do these projects, especially when it's a big franchise, I'll take in all of this stuff so that I can then just put it all away and then just think about where I can take this character and take it in a place, hopefully, that it hasn't been before, and take it in a personal way. So yeah, that's what I did. And people still love those takes on Elric, and people still collect that art, and that makes me feel good. I'm glad they do.
Let me hit you with one more, because this is the perfect example for me as a fan. When you say fans come up and say, "Man, that's that book. You captured that book," and that is the classic book of Canticle for Leibowitz.
Oh wow!
Your cover of that. Talk to me about that opportunity when that came your way. Absolute landmark book.
Yeah, it is. And it's a book that I wish I would have read earlier in my life, because when I read that one, I was like, God, if I would have this would have gotten a hold of me when I was in my teens.
Yeah.
That might have changed a lot of things for me. So I didn't read it for the first time until I got that gig. And it was Diana Gill, still a friend of mine, who was the HarperCollins editor, or one of them at the time. And she came to me with that gig. And at the time I had done a few big covers, but that was one of the biggest at that point. That's over 20 years ago. And I think I am proud to say that one is still in print as the U.S. cover even now. And that's kind of rare. You don't see covers continue to be the branding icon for, at least in the U.S., for something for, more than a decade. Usually they try to change out the cover art, because you kind of have to sometimes to, adapt to the times and, refresh it for a new generation. But the fact that one's still out there and still faced out, on top of not only being out there on the shelves, but a lot of times bookshelves still face that cover out. That really kind of touches me. That means that it's still connecting, and that I created something that just transcends a certain moment.
Dude, you captured that. For me, like, I love that book, and that cover is that book. Like, it captures that book for me. I just wanted to throw that one out there for you.
Do you guys, does everybody out there, do you guys remember a bookstore chain called Borders? I still miss Borders.
I do.
Yeah, there was this place called Borders, and I used to love Borders. Barnes and Noble's great, sure, but Borders we had a great one near where I live here, and they've been gone for many years. But I was at a thing called the World Fantasy Convention one year, and it's kind of a publishing convention where you have a lot of authors, publishers, editors, some artists, and a lot of very hardcore readers. But it's usually only a couple thousand folk. And the buyer for Borders, the national buyer for the Borders chain, was at this convention. And I was at a party, and he walked up to me. He said, "Listen, I just need to tell you something. This cover that you just did for Canticle for Leibowitz," and by the way, the book hadn't been out yet. It hadn't come out yet. So he was telling me something before the book had been put on the shelves. He said, "This cover you just did, there at the time, there was also a Bantam edition. Another publishing house had the paperback rights, I believe, to the Canticle for Leibowitz. I had done the trade paperback cover for HarperCollins. So HarperCollins, I know this is getting a little bit inside baseball for people, but there's a point to this, I promise you. So the trade paperback, I had done the cover for that for HarperCollins. The mass market paperback, Bantam had those rights. And the guy said, we canceled our orders on the Bantam and tripled the orders on the HarperCollins strictly because of your cover.
Based on that cover.
And I'm going to tell you, I think I got, I don't know how many HarperCollins jobs after that because of that one guy making that call, completely. It's pretty cool.
I got to look, I know we've talked about Game of Thrones before in the calendar, but I have to bring it up because, look, this is my all-time favorite epic fantasy series. When that came your way and you got to work with George R.R. Martin, and I know you guys are friends to this day. What was that? What was that like?
It's extremely memorable. I mean, I don't know. This one could go on a long time, so I'm going to keep it very short. I walked up to him at a party. It was in 2008. Again, it was at a Worldcon. Again, there was a lot of alcohol. There seems to be a common denominator with a lot of these stories, right?
Yeah.
And he was with a lot of his homies in this little circle at this party. And this is back in the day when I used to carry this little metal portfolio that was surgically attached to my armpit. And I would just carry it with me at conventions because I always felt like, and I had learned that during the day hours at a convention, especially a publishing show, nobody wants to look at your portfolio. They're too busy. They've got stuff. They got meetings. They got people they want to see. They're not interested in looking at your stuff. But once they're all liquored up at 1 a.m., all of a sudden it's like, hey, man, what's in the box? They get loose. They get relaxed. And so you always want to have that thing with you. And I would. So I would have that thing just stuck there. And so I was at the party and I told George, hey, listen, I've got some portfolio stuff here, but I don't want to bother you. Maybe at some point later in the show, or maybe even later tonight, maybe I could show you some of these pictures. And, I'd just love to work with you someday. And he said, hey, John, look, I already know who you are. I've seen your stuff. And I was like, how have you seen my stuff? And he just started rattling off all these covers just off the top of his head. And I was like, I guess you have seen my stuff. He's like, don't worry, we'll work together someday. And he just turned around and just started talking to his people. And I walked away with my homies and I said, man, that was the coolest brush off I've ever heard in my life. That was awesome. And made you feel like $1 million, but completely just said, okay, get out of here, basically. Yeah. Year later, I'm in Montreal, same convention, World Science Fiction or Worldcon. And I'm with some of my friends at a party. And George walks up to me right behind me and taps me on the shoulder and says, hey, remember I said we're going to have a conversation or we would work together someday? Let's go down to the bar downstairs. So he takes me down to this basement bar in the hotel. And he says, have you ever read my Song of Ice and Fire books? And I was like, are those the big fat ones? He says, yes, John, those are the big fat ones.
Yes.
And I said, yeah, I haven't read them. Not yet. And I thought he was going to pitch me maybe the thought of maybe me doing covers. And sure. And he said, have you seen this calendar by Michael Comark? And I said, I've never seen this calendar that you're talking about, but I've seen pictures from it. I know this guy's work. He said, there's a reason you haven't seen that calendar because it's got horrible distribution because it was done by a publisher that had no idea what they were doing. I'm paraphrasing, but basically he was not happy with the way this calendar had been distributed and put out into the marketplace. And he said, we're going to redo this. We're going to scrap that deal and we're going to go to the mothership, which is my publisher, Random House. And we're going to do this calendar the right way. And I want a tradition, not unlike the way Tolkien has a calendar every year that's illustrated by a big time artist like the Hildebrandt brothers or Alan Lee or John Howe. And I want that tradition for my books. And I want you to be the first guy to do a calendar for it. And there's no Game of Thrones, okay, people. That doesn't exist
yet. That was just way early.
Yeah, and at the time I was working on an Elric book, which means an Elric cover plus all the interiors. And I think I was working on at least 9-10 other covers at the same time. I mean, this is one of the busiest periods I've ever had in my career. And I was doing way too many covers all at once just because I love doing the stuff so much. Remember I told you about that faucet? It was just, it was constantly running and I was having to constantly run it to do all these things, but I was in the toy store and loving it. So the most professional answer I could have given would have been no, because I'm already doing way too much. I could not look this man in the eye and say no, though. I knew I had to do this gig. I could not pass on this. And so I said yes. And it was a very, 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 very hard year. And George made it really easy, though, because he was such a great art director. And he was, in a sense, the de facto art director on his job because, one of my favorite things he said to me was, you're going to do this job. And I want a John Picasso vision of my characters.
Oh.
And he said that in the bar. And I remember that was the thing that made me say, I know this is going to kill me, but I think this was the right call. I hope this was. We used to have these things called faxes back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
and so I never had one. I had to go to Kinko's to use their fax machine, but I faxed in the contract for that gig back when I had to do it like that. And I guess it was 5 minutes after I got back home from faxing and I got a call on the studio phone and it was George. And he said, welcome to the family. And I was like, good. It's good to be here, George. Why are you calling? He said, well, I just saw the fax. And I was like, I sent it to Random House, though. He's like, yeah, I know. They just sent it to me. They just emailed it to me, though. I wanted to know as soon as you signed the deal.
Yeah.
I was like, well, yeah, it's done. He's like, I know. Well, welcome to the family. And I was like, well, cool, man. I got something to share with you. I just signed a deal too. I was like, what did you just sign? I just signed a deal with HBO to do a
Whoa!
show based off of these books. And I was like, cool. And he says, remember what I told you about I want a John Picacio vision? As we start casting this show, I don't want you looking at any of the stuff that comes out online or from Entertainment Weekly, if there is anything like that, that shows any of these casting decisions. I want you to just do your thing. And I didn't have any problem with that because all I wanted to do was my thing. And I just wanted to kind of immerse myself in these books. I could care less what other people had done with these things before. As I told you, I would always go back and look at that stuff. But in terms of what people were going to do from this point forward into the future, I really didn't want to even look at that. So that wasn't a problem to agree to that. And now 2020 hindsight, looking all these years later, especially with what I said earlier, now we know why he said that in a way. He did want that. He was genuine, but also he was passing my illustrations to the producers of Game of Thrones as they were casting the show. So very interesting now to look back on that and realize that that was happening. And I don't look at it as anything underhanded by George. Got no problem with it. All I wanted was for my friend to have a great calendar. And at the time, I just hoped his show would be a success and that he would even get to have a show.
I think it was.
So I was glad to have some small, tiny part in it. But if you look at, the casting of Isaac, I could see my illustration for Arya in the casting of Maisie.
Mm-hmm.
And I obviously can see my illustration for Rob in the casting of Richard Madsen. I mean, that's pretty much a dead likeness. And that dude was not cast at the time when I had done that illustration. So good on them. I'm glad it worked out.
One last thing I want to talk about before I turn it over to Jacob, and that is working with George, doing all these iconic covers, working with these legacy franchises, and then you decided, like we talked about a little bit earlier, to go your own way and start your Loteria project.
Yeah,
and we're gonna we'll pick some of your faves to throw up on the screen as we talk about this.
Sure.
What was that like to make that call as an artist? Like, you know what? I'm gonna go my own way here and just start working on this project. And right down there, everyone, is the website where you can go see all of this, and there are prints and amazing things available. So please don't miss out. Right down there in the descriptions. Sorry about that, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, I can remember the moment actually. So I had won my first Hugo in 2012, and there's that kind of moment where you know you're on a high. And I will also say to the people out there that awards are great, they're cool, and I've won a lot of them. But I will say also that they kind of are really meaningless, other than the fact that they change the way people look at you for a very, very short amount of time. And that short window of time where you have there's a new perception of you and what you do with that opportunity, that's the most important thing about the award. It's not the hardware and it's not the status thing. It's the idea that people look at you just a little differently for just a small window of time, and how you use that to create new opportunities and open doors that didn't exist before. That's why an award can be meaningful and important. And that's really the only thing that's the most important. But I've always tried to recognize that. So when I won that Hugo, I kind of knew that, well, I can keep being a gun for hire who could keep trying to contend for these things. And I did stay in that pocket for a very long time. And but I knew also that it was a really important moment to evolve and try to open a door within myself that hadn't been even conceived before. And the idea of creating my own property, creating things that come from me as opposed to me just being a gun for hire. And that I was going to have a little more of an audience now that might perhaps begin to support something like that. And so those cards initially became a reward within a calendar Kickstarter that I had done, where it was this calendar that was kind of a greatest hits collection of some of my illustrations at the time. And those Loteria cards were kind of part of the rewards from that Kickstarter. And they were something I was very proud of, because I was bringing my culture into the conversation. I was reshaping my culture in my own way. And I think that that's something that's very important to me, is trying to teach people to engage these bigger phenomena and these sort of institutional frameworks, but shape them in your own way and make them personal and reshape them on your own terms and bring something new to it. And I wanted to try to do this stuff instead of just thinking about it. And so that's what those cards kind of meant to me, was they were an opportunity for that, and they still are. It's an ongoing series that honestly keeps getting broken up by all these projects that I keep doing, but there's always sort of been this story framework that I've been evolving to that connects these images together. I'm about almost halfway done with the series, and because of the Invisible Parade, I had to take almost I had to take a few years off from Loteria, honestly, to try to accomplish the Invisible Parade. But I am heading back into those cards, like literally right now, along with this other book that's literally running right back here in my head right now. But there's going to be more Loteria cards coming. But yeah, that thing started in 2012. It's a long time ago. It's 13 years ago. But again, it's not like, just like with the Invisible Parade. The Invisible Parade wasn't 10 years to make. It's just 10 years since I first thought of it. Loteria, same thing. I first started conceiving of these cards back in 2012, but it's not like I've been working on it for 13 years. It's just sometimes these things take a while to complete, but it's because you're juggling so many other things at the same time.
And you got to let it drip back here, like you say.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Well, I just saw on your social media that the Loteria cards have appeared in a movie now, so that's pretty freaking cool, man.
Yeah. See, that's the thing too. So I mean, you do these things, and I didn't create Loteria. I mean, Loteria is public domain. Anybody could create their own Loteria, but good luck creating one that's like mine. I mean, at this point, I mean, it's its own thing, and it's pretty hard to copy it. But yeah, I mean, I was touched by that because the screenwriter, a guy named C. Robert Cargill, he's the guy that he wrote Sinister, the horror film Sinister. He was the screenwriter for Doctor Strange, which I still think is one of the best of the Marvel movies. Scott Derrickson is his best friend, and he's the director, Derrickson, and Cargill's the screenwriter, and they're the team that did Black Phone, the Black Phone, based off of a Joe Hill short story. Low budget film that had big box office, relatively speaking. And so what studio is that? Universal, I believe. They threw some more money and said, hey, let's go do a sequel. And the boys put together a pretty cool movie, I must say. And I can't remember where in the process, but I remember Cargill saying something like, hey, I hope you're not mad, but I wrote your cards into my movie. And I was like, what? What do you mean you wrote my cards into your movie? Anyway, he didn't give me a real detailed explanation of how they were in the movie, but he just asked if it was okay, and that there would be paperwork coming for me to sign off on. And I ran it through my agent, and in the end I shipped my cards up to Toronto for the production. And it's Hollywood, so you don't know if these things are going to end up being on the cutting room floor or not, just because you're going to being asked to put your stuff, send your stuff for shooting in a movie doesn't mean it's going to be in there.
Yeah.
So it was a few months later, I asked him, I was like, hey, did those things even make the film? And he's like, did they make the film? He's like, do you realize what these are? No, you never told me. And so he told me, I'm not going to spoil it for the audience out there. Go see Black Phone 2. But yeah, they're in a very critical scene in the movie.
Oh, cool.
Where that is like a bonding moment between two characters. And, I mean, there's a lot of products out there over the history of filmmaking that pay really good money to have their product show up even for just a second or a second and a half in a key scene in a film. So if you have like an inanimate objects up there for like a second or two, that's valuable. Well, these things are in there for like 10 seconds as the characters, as this one the female protagonist basically flips through them. And it's like it's not like she goes through the whole deck or anything, but they're up there for several seconds. I'd say close to 10, I must say.
Wow. They did you right, man. That's cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. It's just, again, it's nice to see your friends succeed, and it's nice to be able to be a part of that. And I appreciated him doing it. It was cool.
Well, all right, Jacob, I'm going to turn this over to you, and you got a few. I can't wait for you to get back into Invisible Parade a little bit before we cut John loose.
Yeah, I can't wait either. I can't wait so much that I'm not even going to try for a segue. We're talking about the Invisible Parade once again. I read this recently and just had so wonderful of a time with it. There will be a link in the description. It's your most recent release. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but now we're going to get deeper into the makings of this wonderful, wonderful book. I wanted to ask you specifically about one. I don't even know the technical term here. A spread, but a full
spread.
2-page illustration. Spread would be correct.
Spread.
Now,
that's it.
For those that have not caught on yet, this is going to be a very visual episode as we're putting art up, but I will do my best to hold up the spread so that John knows which one that I'm talking about here.
While you're finding it, I'll say, so this is a picture book. And so when people hear the words picture book, they think, oh, it's just for kids. Like this isn't meant for me.
Right.
When Lee and I were creating this book, we knew this was a picture book, that we wanted to have a story that was accessible to younger kids. But I think when adults, experience this thing for the first time, when they flip through it, I love that so many adults already are realizing, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This thing is way more layered, I will say, than most picture books. And some of my most gratifying experiences in the last month have been these social media comments that keep coming in daily from people saying, hey man, I'm 56 years old. I'm just going to cop to it. I bought this for myself. And I love that, because this thing, it was meant for all of us. I mean, even though it's
Yes.
sold in the picture book section there, in the children's section of Barnes and Noble, people who think they're buying it for kids end up buying one for the kid, but end up buying one for themselves, because, we all have to deal with the loss of our loved ones at some point. And we try to create a book that would be resonant in a way that kids will see it on a certain level and experience the story on a certain level. But the adults, there's stuff baked into this cake that's really not going to be, it's not that the kids can't, or how you say, would be too scared to access it. It's just that they're not able to, because they're just too young.
Yeah.
Whereas adults being more worldly and having been through more stuff, you'll be able to kind of read the story in a different way. And I'm glad it hits people, and I'm glad it helps them.
I think it hits people in a lot of different ways. And for me, it's one of those books that when you finish it and you close it, it's the highest compliment that I can give to it is that it's a story that you immediately want to hand off to someone and say, you have to read this. You feel the need to share it with people.
Thanks, man.
And for me, this spread exactly was one of those moments for me. And I'll put this art on screen, but we can put in some arrows and stuff to show you what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask you about the flow of this frame specifically, because you really do a lot with shapes and paths in this illustration to kind of dictate where the eye goes, and it almost corresponds with the tone and pacing of the words that Lee wrote that goes along with them. We're up here at the top and yet moving down along with this man on the ladder and to the grandmother looking down at the hat, and moving up with these paths that you've illustrated here with the skulls going upward with the brother and sister arguing with each other. And the time that we cross over this barrier that you've illustrated here is when we hit this one line of text and the pacing starts to slow down and the tone shifts into something a little bit more soulful and sorrowful. Now, I want to know that that's a lot of work that goes into working with the story with your illustration. Is that something that you work really closely with Lee on, that spread, or is that something that you do all by yourself? How does that come to be specifically?
I mean, everything's a collaboration on that book with me and her. I don't think there's anything where I was ever we worked in isolation to do our jobs, but I was never interested in doing something where I said, this is my vision and this is the way it's going to be, and my vision overrides however you may feel about this. I mean, I think the way we worked on this, and we're both very ferocious people, I must say. And if Lee's listening to this, she's probably going to laugh, but she'll also agree. I think that when at least for me, if I didn't feel like I was surprising her or making her feel like, that feeling of like, oh my God, wow, then I didn't feel like we got there, So I always felt like I really wanted to be able to make her feel like I had taken this thing to somewhere that she couldn't have gone, that she didn't even conceive. And so, so when I'm doing that, I am sort of working on my own, but then when it's done, you present it to her and you present it to your agent and your editor, and you really want to hear kind of how it connects with them. And, Lee being my partner, if she wasn't moved, then I didn't feel like we got there. And thankfully, for the most part, most of those spreads, I knew when I showed it to her that it got her, but it wouldn't have done it. It wouldn't have gotten there without her, being there with me in coming up with how those beats were going to lay out from spread to spread. We plotted this thing together, and there's a certain point, and I did have thumbnails before she did the words, but once she has the words, I will say that her script, and Lee may remember this better than I do, but I thought she kind of got the script or the word choices pretty early on when she first took on, her part of the job, where it's like, okay, now it's time for you to go work out those words, Lee. And I had worked out some of it myself, and I had given those things to her, but she being known as we're co-writers on it, but she's kind of doing the scripting. She's putting that Lee Bardugo magic on it. And so when she did, even though I had presented a lot of some of the word ideas, I wanted it to be hers. I wanted her to feel like it was her thing and not be possessive over it. So when she got done with that, I remember, even though it was early in the process, I remember being so in love with a lot of these lyrical ideas she had come up with in the writing that I was very protective of it. And so when I'm blocking out where that stuff's going to be, over my thumbnails, I was basically scanning in my thumbnails and then dropping in chunks of her text and thinking about where I wanted to move pieces of the illustration so that it would flow with her words. So this is kind of answering your question of, I was really thinking about how the beats of her words would intersect with the beats of my illustration, and where do you get that from? What medium teaches us that? Comics.
Yep.
Comics, comics is, a lot of times it's like they're leaving placements for the words, but those, I don't know, different houses did it different ways. Sometimes the balloons, I think with EC, I think they put the balloons in first, I think, and then the illustrations came in around it. Somebody can correct me on that. I'm sure they will. But other houses, they do the illustration and then leave room for the balloons and they come in at the end. I don't know. I just knew that I wanted the words and the pictures to dance, and I knew I wanted them to flow together. And the things you were describing, Jacob, a lot of it's about controlling value. And same thing in comics, right? We have a term, they have a term, or we have a term in comics. I'll say it, even though I don't do a lot of comics because I still consider myself a comics guy. Spotting blacks, right? Spotting blacks is an inker term where you have these large dark areas on a given page, and whether we know it or not, those dark masses of ink are kind of what guide our eye through the page composition and help us read the story and tell the story to ourselves. And so I'm not thinking any differently, even though I'm working in graphite. I'm thinking about where these major sort of dark and light values are helping me to guide the reader's eye through the piece. And that spread you were showing there, that's different moments in time that we're trying to depict there in that spread. And so you really have to be very purposeful in how you move people's eye through there, lest you just completely confuse them. And those, even those undulating shapes of what was it on that spread? Was it Pan de Muerto? I'm trying to remember what was on that spread, but there's those undulating shapes that are on some of the various spreads. And, like I told you guys earlier, there's a lot of layers baked into this cake. And when you start to realize what those undulations are and what those are suggesting, that's another sort of symbolic layer, as there are so many of them throughout this book. I'll just tell you guys right now, without being coy about it, Quetzalcoatl. So again, I'll say that a little slower. Quetzalcoatl. So that's the Mexican
serpent god,
symbol
Aztec.
For resurrection, or Aztec symbol for resurrection and knowledge and life cycle. And that image is loaded and layered throughout this entire narrative. And so even those scene dividers, if you want to call them, are references to Quetzalcoatl. So I'll use different elements to create those scene dividers based on whatever thematic concept I'm trying to convey on a given spread. So yeah, there's a lot in there. It's not your usual picture book, I will say.
No,
just for kids.
Not at all.
Because it's not just for kids. Yeah.
But I'm so glad that you brought up comics, because to me, when I was reading spreads like that, because that's not the only one that you have that works that way. So many of them work that way. Me being a film guy, I felt like man, we're really pushing the boundaries of the medium of a picture book here, because I feel like I'm looking at storyboards, the way that you're just directing my vision and we're flowing through a scene or a sequence even. That's how it felt to me reading that.
Oh, that's cool, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's we're on a show called Talking Story, and this is about telling story, visual story. I mean, um, Guillermo del Toro has that what is that phrase? It's not eye candy, it's eye protein. And he's not talking about the boogers in your eyes. He's talking about visual substance in storytelling, right? And so every, eye candy is superficial, just detail that's just meant to impress. And in the end, your eye gets tired because it's not really holding any meaning, and you can feel that and tell that. Uh, Eye protein, though, is things that carry a story along, that are meant there to reinforce the structure of the story you're trying to tell. And in fact, they create the structure. And so all those things and all those decisions and choices I'm making, even in some of the busiest spreads, believe me, I have distilled it down, even as busy as some of those are, so that every single element in there is helping to tell the story that we're trying to tell. But there's a lot of layers within that sort of simple structure of the story, because essentially we're talking about a story it's the Wizard of Oz meets the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse meets the Day of the Dead, but as a fun adventure story. I mean, that is what it is. It's a pretty simple story, but I hope that in the sort of the way that I've visually layered it, that it has an emotional complexity that's worthy of the occasion.
Well, I'd like to ask you about another piece of eye protein, which is a term I'm absolutely stealing because I love it. I want to talk about the use of color that you use here. As you mentioned earlier, this is a story about a young girl who travels through a graveyard and does meet the Four Horsemen. And we'll put up the illustrations that you do for the Four Horsemen here. You specifically do these illustrations almost with one color for each horseman. For plague, you do this beautiful gold. For famine, you kind of go with a magenta. For war, you do this almost collision between red and blue. And for death, you do like a main placement of green, but with all the other colors kind of employed within there. And I hope I'm getting all that correctly with what
Yeah,
you're
and
attempting
you
to
pretty
do.
much nailed it, boy. That was
But
beautiful. In fact, even the way you described war, I'll come back and elaborate. But continue.
no,
Go
I
ahead.
was just curious if like what the selection process was like for you of wanting to use each color for each of the horsemen and what those colors meant to you.
Well, it's very specific. I mean, it's that palette was about the idea of, how do I say this? Lee and I wanted every element of this story to reinforce what we were trying to do here. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to describe the emotional journey of this girl from her confusion and her sense of loss to her finding herself and finding her place within her culture, but on her own terms. And that last phrase is so important. And so everything is about reinforcing the story of that journey, even down to the color. So if you strip out the draftsmanship, strip out the pencil values, strip out all of the shapes, and just look at the story just in terms of color palette, does that color palette tell the story on its own? And if you can't do that, then then the color palette wasn't doing everything it should have. And so what's the color palette doing here? Well, in the beginning of our story, our character is numb, numb from loss. The food, the experiences, the family's revelry, she's not feeling it. She's literally numb. She's disconnected. And so that's the world is in sepia. It's there's no color there for her. And as she enters the graveyard, there's still no color, but as she when she starts to intersect the first horseman, a little bit of color arrives. And she meets the next horseman, and a little more color gets added. Now she gets to war, and suddenly it's almost like like a warm front meets a cold front, which is what happens when thunderstorms occur. and war is a thunderstorm, and war has a thunderstorm hat, literally. It's this rotating thunderstorm that's around his head that looks like almost like a sombrero. And so, you have these collisions of the warm and the cold, and then when death shows up, it's Technicolor, and the world and the world opens up to her in all of its full color glory. And yes, it's about the horseman, but it's really about her and about how she is coming to terms with processing grief and processing her loss. And so I'll leave it at that, as people will experience the story once they've encountered the horseman for the first time, as Kala encounters them, you can see how the color works out. But, the color was all about telling that story.
The amount of detail in there really makes me want to go back and reread it.
There's a lot of stuff baked in there. When I was a kid, this is going back into the 80s, I used to listen to a lot of heavy metal. I mean, I still do. And back in those days, I mean, this is probably predating a lot of the audience, so I'm not going to bore you to tears, but
not me, John, not me.
They used to get so mad, these parent groups about, this metal's going to rot these kids' brains. And, there's all these backwards messages. If you spin these records backwards, on these turntables, there's backwards messages. And, there's all these tales of this. And there really wasn't any backwards messages on these things. If you spin my record backwards, this book, there's a lot of messages in this book. Go spin the record on this thing. There's plenty of messages. There's messages backwards and forwards in this book. There's a lot of messaging going on in this book. There's a lot of stuff, both coded and not coded. And it's there for a reason, and it's there to teach, and it's there to educate, and it's there to enlighten, and it's there to inspire. And it's there for a purpose, and it's there to be found. And if you don't find it all, I hope you still enjoy the book. You don't have to find this stuff. I didn't want to create a story where you have to discover all these Easter eggs to enjoy it. I just wanted that stuff there for the people who wanted to go look for it. But there's stuff there for sure.
Yeah, in my opinion, it is a special book, and it's capped off with a really special note, both from you and one from Lee Bardugo as well, that I don't want to read the whole thing here because honestly, I don't want to spoil it. I think a lot of the experience of reading this book is kind of capped off by those two notes from you and Lee at the end, but I will kind of summarize a little bit that it goes over your experience as a child in San Antonio and looking for a lot more representation than you were actually able to experience with the Mexican culture. And this was a story that had kind of, as you said earlier, been gnawing at the back of your head for 10 years. And I think it'd been in your heart for even longer, it sounds like. And now I'm holding it. Other people are holding it and reading it. It's on their coffee tables. It's real. It's out there. Is this an experience for you as an artist that is kind of capped off a really long journey and feel like you're a different artistic identity now that this part of you is out in the world? Or have you done so many different pieces, and now with the Loteria cards as well that have been out there for so long, is this just one more stepping stone in the great John Picacio journey?
It might be both. I don't know. I'm in the middle of the war, so it's hard for me to process it all. Right. I mean, I think that word. I think you used the phrasing of like, is this a culmination? I don't know if that's the word you use, but I feel like this is a beginning. I mean, I can only say it that way. That I didn't know when I was doing this book if there would be another picture book. I did know I had another book in me because Loteria had already been there. This book was hard. It was hard to do. I'd never done a book like this. Again, I'm not educated in these things. There's people who go to school for stuff like this. There's people who go to school to become writers, and I'm doing this all kind of on the job, so to speak. But I also feel like this is kind of who I am, and it's about me having to confront that and become it in a way without practicing. Just go do it. Don't sit there and act like, well, in a few years I'll work up to this. How about just go do it? And I was lucky enough to have one of the greatest writers on the planet as my partner to kind of walk me through this journey and be with me in, hand in hand, literally. So I'm a very fortunate person to have Lee with me co-creating this. And I learned so much from her. So I felt like I was in the greatest boot camp in a way, but she was doing it for the first time too. We have to remember that she had never done a picture book either.
Sure.
So it's really great. I do know at this point there is another picture book in my head. That's the one that's sitting back here right now that's still going, and it will again live in the Mexican Gothic just as this one does. And I'm not talking about Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic. I'm saying the Mexican Gothic, as in that space that Del Toro lives in, that space that Sylvia lives in, that space that that I live in, and a lot of my world in my head lives in, and the world that I'm trying to create. Loteria lives in that world as well. Not that this is a connected multiverse, but it is the Mexican Gothic, and I'm proud to live in it. So, and I'm proud to present it to people who aren't Mexican. I want us to all be able to share in it. That's the point of this. Yeah. So there's another picture book in me, at least another one. In fact, I think there's more than just that. I do think also that everything I do from here forth will be me on my own, not with another partner. Not because this wasn't an extraordinary and outstanding experience. I mean, it was, but I think it was my first book, but probably my last one where I'm collaborating with another person directly like that. Because I think the stuff I want to do from here forth is just going to be me.
Well, whatever you do next is going to be a day one buy for me. And for everybody else listening, The Invisible Parade will be available in the description. I highly recommend you pick it up. I'm not just saying this because John's here. I've said it before in an earlier episode when I already read it. I think it is a special, special book and one that everybody should read. So please don't deprive yourself of that experience and pick it up for yourself. John, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks, fellas. Thanks, everybody. Take care out there.
John, look, before we sign off, I got to jump in here and say, look, down there's a link for that book. I think this is something that's special, like John was talking about, for all ages. I think it's one of those things you can share in and amongst generations of your family, and it's going to be beautiful enough. As you've all seen this art go by, you want it. It's a picture book you want out there on your coffee table as a showpiece. And look, I just got to say, John, we went longer than we were thinking. You were so generous and kind to give us your time. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, man. Since that first time you walked into my comic shop, you're my San Antonio brother, man. Spurs forever.
That's right.
I just light up every time I see you, and I thrill with every one of your amazing triumphs, and just couldn't be happier that you spent this time with us tonight.
Thank you, fellas. It's an honor to be here. I'm glad to be part of it.